All right, welcome back. So in this video, if you may end up with a little bit of deja vu, if you've been following along, we're gonna do something similar to what we did in Flask Make Controller. We're going to look at a scenario where our model name has more than one segment. And when we do that, it introduces a little bit of ambiguity. So we're going to make a model called RecipeIngredient, and then we're going to add CRUD to the end of it. And so when we make it in this scenario, Flask Commands can come in and say, well, I'm going to check to see, do you have recipe as a registered model? And if you have recipe as a registered model, then maybe you want ingredient as its own model, and then recipe is a parent model. So it would be like a recipe has many ingredients. And in this particular case, that's probably what we wanted. However, there could be a scenario where the model that you already have registered name just happens to be part of this new model's name, and you need a multi-word to describe a single model. And so it will ask you, okay, well, did you want the full thing as a model? So that would be that flat case. So did you want a nested case where recipe is the parent and ingredient is the child? Or did you want the flat case where the whole thing is the model, recipe ingredient? In this case, we probably were intending for recipe to be the parent and ingredient to be the child. Now, if I mentioned recipe being registered, it doesn't necessarily have to. The recommended path is, if you are doing this nesting, you should do it step by step. And so the prompt, you're going to end up being prompted, and the prompt will change slightly. If recipe is not registered, then what you'll see is you'll see something like this. Okay, do you want this chain, recipe and ingredient? And it will build out both. If recipe is already registered, then it will just say, okay, do you want ingredient? And then it would only build out ingredient. But the RESTful actions will always only go on the last thing. So if you don't have recipe registered, then it will build out recipe, but it won't put RESTful actions on recipe. It would only put the RESTful actions on ingredient, which is why you need to build these step by step. So there's a lot of talking. If you have been following along, there's a link in here that goes back to the controller scenario of this exact same thing. What you're going to notice is my commands are a lot shorter with the model. So what I did is I'm going to go all 4 different cases for you. So I have my demos folder up, and let's just show you what I have set up so far. So I have four new apps, and I just built them with Flask new and then the app name. So in 2 apps, I'm going to have registered already recipe. In the other 2, I will not register recipe. And then we will choose the flat case in this one, and the nested in this one, flat in this one, nested in this one. We'll start without the, so we'll CD into the ones without recipe, and we will do the first one is flat. So let's just run this, and I'll show you exactly what's in VS Code so you can see. It's just a brand new app. Okay, so we'll come here, right, VS Code. All right, so if I come to models, the only thing I have is my user, and just so you can see, routes has just main, templates has just main, controllers is just going to have the main controller. So we are going to do Flask make model recipe ingredient, and then let's make this a little bit bigger, minus CRUD. Okay, so when I press return here, it's going to prompt me. There was no recipe, so it said, okay, do you want me to build the flat model recipe ingredient, all one word? So if you need a model that is multiple words, you have the ability to do that. Or is each segment its own model? Do you want recipe a model, and then recipe has many ingredients? I'm going to, in this, we're doing the flat case, we're going to select one, press return. All right, so here's what we end up with. We end up with a model recipe ingredient, the 2 words, to describe the one thing. And then, so that model is here, and you can add your columns in and make the migration. The controller is going to have the 7 RESTful actions, and notice that the 2-word ID comes along in the cases that it's needed. And then the route is right here, and it's going to have that 2 words with a minus sign in between, dash in between, and then there's the ID. And then it's referencing that recipe ingredient controller. And the template recipe ingredient has the 4 get methods. So there's those. And then in here in our create app, it's registered the recipe ingredient blueprint. So if we go to our browser, we should be able to see recipe. Now, if we try to go recipes, there is no recipes, so we get the 404. But recipe ingredients, there's our recipe ingredients. And so that's the index page. Here's the show page. Here's the create page. So you have everything wired up there. And that would be your flat case. Now, let's terminate this and look at the nested case, which is probably the way that you intended this to be. So we'll cd out of here, and we'll go into without recipe nested. All right, so I will run this one. All right, so I'm just gonna keep getting that message. Okay, so we have our hello world. Now if we try to go to recipe ingredients, we should end up with a 404. Sure enough, we do. Now I'm going to want nested. So we're going to want recipes, 1 ingredients, something like that. I still have my 404, but once we run our command, it should go away. So let's go in here just so you see that I am not tricking you. Okay, so we'll bump it up. So here we have our models, just our user model is here. Routes, just the main. We don't need templates, just the main. So let's go ahead and do the same command. Flask make model recipe ingredient, and then minus CRUD. Now in this case, I'm gonna choose the nested option. So you'll want to make sure you press the 2, or press 2 and hit enter. So we'll hit return. Okay, and then we do not have recipe registered. We don't have a recipe file in our model. So when I press 2, I'm actually going to get 2 models. I should get recipe and ingredients. Recipe and ingredient. Sure enough, there I did. Now, but I mean, you're like, well, then I'm just going to go the full route. If I have 3, I'll just do all 3. Just a word of caution. So here's recipe. You still have to set up all the relationships for this to go through, but and you still have to add your columns and do your migration, but at least it stubs out a good part of your model, and they're all registered. Now let's go to routes. So here, we'll start here. We'll go to create app. Recipe blueprint got registered down here. Okay, we'll routes, and then recipe, and then here's the init. So this is recipe. This is the part for the recipe blueprint. And in here, recipe ingredients blueprint got created. So this is recipe ingredients blueprint. Then there's the recipe ingredient blueprint. And then here is the 7 RESTful actions. So, and notice recipe ID kind of comes along. So we have, it's not a namespace. It's actually, we're thinking of this as a data structure. So that's that nested feature. And so here you're having 2 IDs in that show page. When you're wanting to show an ingredient, you need to know the recipe that it's attached to. So, but if you go to the route here, you don't have any recipe routes. So in our browser, we have a recipe 1 ingredients. That's the show page, or the index page, and then here's our show page. But if you go back, you will not have recipes, and that's why you need to do this step by step. So when I say step by step, you would need to, we'll actually leave this one up. Let's go to the other ones. So we will close this. Close all these. All right. Let's close this. Do we have another one? Yes, we do. Okay. All right. So now let's go to CD. Back out of here. We'll do the with recipe, and we'll do the flat case first. And then I will run this. Okay, now when I run this, my 404 should go away because recipe is now, so there's my whole world. Let's see if this is running. Yes, good. And that's because off camera, I created the app and I used, I made the model for recipe. So let's close this, bump this up. All right, so just so you can see that, here is my recipe model. And I did this with the CRUD option. So in my routes and recipes, I have all 7 RESTful actions. Now, I do not have a recipe ingredient, and that's when we're in the flat case, that's what we're going to build. So just to show you that you can act independently. So what I mean by that, here, let's show you. So we're going to do Flask make model recipe ingredient and minus CRUD. Now, it's going to check and it's going to notice that recipe is a registered model, but you could still have the scenario where this new model is a two-word model, but it just happens to contain a word from an already registered model. And so to have that flexibility, you still have the option of making this flat model, which means that when we are in here, VS Code is really wanting to tell me a lot of things, isn't it? When we're in here, we're going to create a recipe ingredient model when I press 1, or just hit enter. All right. And so there it is. So you have a model recipe and you have a model recipe ingredient. And they are, in this case, we're thinking of them as kind of two separate things. One may not be related to the other. Maybe they are. But in the event that they're not related, that's the scenario we're looking at now, because the routes are all just going to say recipe ingredient. So they don't have a recipe and then recipe ID attached to them prior to that. So if I go to the browser, I have recipe because that has recipe 1 is the show page, and you have that registered here in a separate folder, recipe 1 route. That's this one. But you also have recipe ingredient and then a number, because that's the show page for recipe ingredient. So we could change this, put my cursor here, ingredient 1. Okay, so there, good. We didn't end up with a 404 error, and there we have the index page, and you also have the create page. So that would be the flat case. Now, let's go back. This would end up being the nested case and probably the case that you intended. So let's close all these. For this particular example, I just wanted to show you that you have the flexibility of doing all these things. So cd out of here and into with recipe nested. All right, so we'll run this. All right. So there's our hello world. Now this should now give me a 404. Sure enough, it does. So let's go to VS Code. This is the nested one. Good. So let's bump this up. All right. So I have a model, and in the model, I've registered recipe. In my routes, I have recipes, and here are my 7 RESTful actions for recipes. So if I go to my browser, and we only need one of these open right now, and we go to recipes 1, then that is a thing right now. It's and that I made with the Flask make model recipe minus CRUD. Now I want to add on to that, so I'm going to do Flask make model and then recipe ingredient minus CRUD. And then this time I'm going to choose 2. I want, and notice I don't have recipe listed here, just ingredient. That's the new one. And so it will build out an ingredient model. Let's go to VS Code so you can see that. Okay. So here, I'm going to get, I just got the ingredient model. And that's the new thing. And then, but it's nested. So in my routes, if I close this up, it's under recipe. I'm going to have an ingredients folder. Under recipes, I have an ingredients folder. And here are my routes for the new ingredients structure, but they all come along with recipes and recipe ID. And so that way you have this nice nesting in your browser. So if I go recipes 1 and look at its ingredients, I do not have a 404. So, and then I can go ingredients 2 and I can say ingredients create. All right, so let's go back. So we kind of, if you've gone along with us, you're going to feel like we already did this, and we did. We did this in make controller. We did the same idea. Hopefully you noticed that the commands were a lot shorter. I didn't have to keep writing controller. I didn't have to keep adding the -m. For me, that's the way I like to think, is using the make model. And it's the same scenario that we had with make controller. You had these two different prompts. It's identical. So you're probably going to think, well, we could skip these prompts because in make controller we had these additional options of minus flat and minus nest. And in fact, you're correct. And we'll see that in the next video.